പോളണ്ടിൽ എന്ത് സംഭവിച്ചു? പോളണ്ടിനെ പറ്റി നീ ഒരു അക്ഷരം മിണ്ടരുത്.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Harsha. How are you this week?
I am wonderful. It's been a while since we've recorded, as we were just discussing.
So we had started last time talking about sort of supernatural in Malayalam cinema, and we're back with another episode of that with a couple of films that explore two different traditions today.
Yeah, we are talking about Ezra, which is based on the Jewish religious folkloric idea of the Dibuk, and we're talking about a movie that alternatively has been titled Sarppakavu or Sarppakadu. Sarppakavu means snake grove, religious grove, typically where there's an idol or a deity to worship, or Sarppakadu, which just means snake forest. So if people are looking for this movie, you should Google tends to find Sarppakadu before Sarppakavu, but the title credit says Sarppakavu.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you what the difference was, because depending on how I searched was how I find it. And I would also recommend don't watch the version on Eros, because it has about 15 minutes where the video is blurry. And they cut out a big segment of the film. So actually, maybe we want to start with that one today.
Yeah. So Sarppakavu or / Sarppakadu. I'm going to call it Sarppakavu because that's the name I knew it when I watched it when I was really young. It's from 1965, and it's one of those movies that used to get played on Doordarshan, or like when Asianet started on Asianet all the time. And I'm sure that a lot of people probably just turned off the TV because it was black and white. For some reason, this, that's what I used to do, or change the channel. What about this movie caught me was like Sukumari as a young woman. I recognized her face and I was just like, oh, yes. I like kind of started watching it and I got into the story. So as I mentioned, this movie stars Sukumari as the second heroine and Ambika Sukumaran. They're cousins in real life, but they play sisters in this movie.
And I'm just going to jump in briefly and say, first of all, warn people that I watched without subtitles, so I have a sort of a surface understanding, and hopefully you'll help me learn more. And also spoilers. I also forget to say that we talk about spoilers. I always put it in the show notes, but spoilers. So go watch the films, not on Eros. Find the copy on YouTube.
That's where I watched it. I watched it on YouTube.
So the whole point of this story.
There is a supernatural element to it, but actually a lot of this is about tradition versus modernity. The central conflict is between the father of the heroines, who is a traditional snake, who are part of a clan that like traditionally worship snakes. I mean, that's not uncommon in Kerala. They have exoticized it a little bit in this movie. And then the father of the hero and his father are both doctors and scientists who come to the forest that the heroine lives in, looking for a antidote to snake bite. So they're looking for this very special snake.
I mean, this is something we talked in the last episode too, this juxtaposition of traditional beliefs and sort of modern and sciencey stuff. So I was quite fascinated by seeing that turn up again. And quite honestly, this is a film I actually went searching for years ago, because the online blogging community used to do a snake movie month. And at the time when I went looking, I could only find like one song from it. So even without subtitles, I was kind of glad to get a chance finally to see it. So I think like a lot of, the blogging community is kind of familiar with snakes and snake worship in India. But you're right, it does seem to have a little bit of a twist in Kerala.
Yeah, snakes are not often the central the Kuladeva, which is like the family god of a lot of Hindus, is often not a snake. But in Nair families, especially in Kerala, Kuladeva is a snake, and they have these groves, the Sarppakavu, where the deity is the snake that they worship. So there's this in the religious iconography. There's Sri Padmanabha, the god that Trivandrum is named after, is floating on a big snake in the ocean of milk that is supposedly the universe. There's a lot of snake motifs in Kerala and specifically in Nair households. I think a little bit more in Kerala. And, when you read Dalit writers about Dalit religious observances or scheduled tribe religious observances, you realize what is happening a lot of the time is extremely localized and non-Brahminical. So not like Vedic Hinduism, the extremely mainstream like Shiva Krishna Brahma Hinduism. That Hinduism has kind of co-opted and weaved in many local and village gods, that animistic traditions that are present to making Hinduism a national religion was a project of many, many millennia. So a few millennia ago, these people who worshipped snakes would not have considered themselves Hindus. Obviously, Hindu is not even a self-identification until very recently. It's a word that comes from Arabs who talked about the people who lived past the Indus River. So these are animistic beliefs that you see in Kerala, and animism is very common in the northeast parts of India, and they don't necessarily get called Hinduism in the same way that Kerala, because it's kind of become part of the mainstream Hindu culture, gets included even the animistic beliefs that are not part of mainstream Hinduism. And that's something cool about Hinduism, is that you can kind of start grabbing traditions from all sorts of ethnic groups and make it yours. But I know a lot of Dalit thinkers are not keen on all of these ideas becoming considered Hinduism, because they want to have separate identities and to be able to worship their village gods without being considered Hindus as such, because caste plays a huge role in the way South Asians can look at Hinduism. That's a long-winded way of saying that basically these traditions are highly specific to the various parts, the various villages, the various families that worship snakes.
So the family we're looking at in the film, the father and his two daughters, is this a family snake grove that they manage?
That is what I understood. He says at some point this was a very thriving area, and it seemed like that this was his clan or whatever. His people lived in harmony with nature, and they never had to fear animals, and that it seemed like he was saying that modernity had kind of encroached and made them kind of isolated, and just this family of 3 people who are responsible for taking care of the snake goddess and her sort of worship. And specifically, he talks about the doctors bringing guns into the forest as being something that sets off nature against humans.
Well, and that does happen in the course of the film. One of my favorite scenes is the one with that giant flower with the eye in the center.
Yeah.
And it's, on some level, it's kind of a silly segment. I mean, it's one of the things when you go back to like early films from the 50s and the 60s, it really feels like a much more innocent time and a much more innocent kind of humor and a much more innocent kind of fear. And I was sort of fascinated with how they shot that whole segment with Madhu and Adoor Bhasi getting caught in the vines, and they end up rescued by the 2 sisters who know what they have to do, which is, stab a knife into the eye of the flower, and it just sort of falls over dead. I'm not trying to say, to laugh too hard at that, because it's very gentle and old fashioned, but it's also an important point in the film that they're there and they're waving their gun around, and they're there specifically to get this snake that lives in the snake grove where the worship is taking place. And they're not really very thoughtful about how they're doing that. They just have this idea that they want us to, create a snake anti-venom thing, because the film opens with somebody dying of a snake bite.
Yep, and they are dressed in very much in old-fashioned like safari gear, like cravats and in like a little upturned hat. It's very silly look. And then the girls and like the father are in this extremely Vedic looking outfit. He's got like a top knot, like a Rishi Muni type, like the sages of represented in old time Amar Chitragatha type depiction of the Vedas and the Hindu epics. He looks like he's from another time, and then like this guy, the doctors are dressed like little Lord Fauntleroy. So
well, Madhu in particular, like he's got the fanciest safari suit and the boots with detailing. They look sort of cowboy boots with the kind of detailing on them, and yeah, so he's very elegant until the end when all the ties come undone.
And there's when we're talking about that vine scene, Madhu's just like rolling around. I mean, there is like a huge amount of suspension of disbelief or going along with the ride. That is more innocent, I agree. Because I'm sure, like, in the YouTube comments, people were arguing in Malayalam about whether this movie was good or not. And, like, somebody said, this is so boring. And then the other person said, but don't you enjoy the innocence of this movie? And they were like, no, it's just boring and badly acted.
Well, and it is of the time.
It is very much of the time. And so what we consider bad acting was just their theatrical form of acting.
Yes.
Madhu especially was not known to be a naturalistic actor. He is known to be a theatrical actor. And Ambika Sukumari too, she kind of reminds me of Sheila in the same way that she kind of stares up at the camera and just like plaintively delivers her lines. Sukumari has a bit, I mean, as we know from having seen her in much more recent films, she had a much more realistic way of acting, even though the dialogue was a little stilted in that theatrical sense, she was delivering it much more naturally, in my opinion.
Yeah, and even Madhu uses his hands to sort of emphasize things, and you're right, it's very much comes out of theater tradition, and even you look at Hindi films from the same period, and people were coming out of theater and working in film, and you get the same kind of dialogues and dialogue delivery and the same kind of sort of stiff body language, which I get would not be appealing to some people today because things have come so far. But even we can laugh a little bit at the vine scene, or there's a scene later where Madhu is wrestling with a snake. And it's like very, very acting. Very acting.
There's also the bear attack scene.
Yes.
The person in a bear costume. that was funny. And like I genuinely was laughing. I mean, I know you're not supposed to be laughing, but I had a good time watching them in the scene. So if you want to have a good time, I would look at all the nature attack scenes in this movie because they are kind of fun.
Oh, God. And was it this? Yeah, it was this film where there's this long segment where there's a bird attacking a snake. And it just goes on and on and on.
Okay, so I will be honest. Like, every time they cut to the snakes, I was a little bit zoned out. I was like, cool, the snakes are doing something now. I'm going to, look at my phone. So it might be this movie, but I don't remember that scene.
And I just might be confusing because I watched a lot of snake stuff this week.
Oh, you did? What else have you watched?
I was actually watching maybe that's where it is. I was watching an old Telugu movie that had a snake. See, because it was like snakes all over this week.
Okay. Yeah, I don't remember that scene from this movie.
Yeah, and the other thing with the Ross print was they cut out the bear attack.
Oh, the bear attack was great. You should definitely check it out on the YouTube.
Yes, I was so grateful that I switched. I went searching, and that's where I got caught out because I didn't search on the other way to spell it in anglicized.
Yes. Yeah.
And when I reversed that, I found it on YouTube and started watching there a second time through, and I went, that's why she disappeared.
Right, exactly. It does happen at the tail end, and then things change very quickly. That's where the climax happens. So things pick up at that point because a lot of the time they're the mid of the movie, the comedy scenes, man. There's that one bit where he swallows the harmonica, and
and that was the bit where there were no visuals on Ross.
Okay.
So I was going, what was going on here? I have to admit, I laughed at that when I saw it on YouTube. It's very silly.
Those scenes I can definitely see being great for children to watch. Like,
Yes.
it's a very silly, like, cartoony comedy. Yeah, so there's like extended scenes between like the housekeeper or of the guest house the doctors are staying at, and Pion, who's Kerala is called a compounder. He's kind of like their assistant who's trying to help catch the snakes. And also wooing Sukumari's character, but he gets beat up by her dad and has to swallow his like harmonica.
Well, and it's, I mean, on the other hand, it's an interesting contrast because at one point he's using the harmonica to try and mesmerize the snakes.
The snake charm, yeah.
So there's a purpose to the harmonica. Okay, one question I did have, because again, going in at it without subtitles, when that character is attacked by the bear and they take her to the doctors and she dies, is it because the father refuses to treat her, or he can't treat her, or it's just too late?
He tries to bargain for the snake with her dad, and her dad says no, so he lets her die.
Okay, I that's exactly what I thought happened. So then it makes an awful lot of sense why her father goes after Madhu's character.
Yeah.
And targets him to be bit by the snake. So then why is he willing at that point to help save Madhu's character?
His daughter pleading for his life convinced him. Again, that wasn't a very super strong plot point because it was very clear before that she was in love with the guy. Her dad didn't pick up on that.
I thought he kept finding his daughter with Madhu and Adoor and...
Yeah, so towards the middle of the movie, I feel like he's very certain that like, his daughters are spending a lot of time with these guys, and I feel he's like trying to protect them against being charmed by these guys, and he thinks that they're gonna charm them and like make them fall in love with them, and then run off with a snake or try to get access to the snake. So maybe that's why he realizes their love is true or something at the end. And he does warn her that if what she's asking requires a great sacrifice, and then that something bad will happen. But
well, and he ends up, the great sacrifices, he ends up dying.
Yes, because when you take out the poison, it has to go somewhere.
I'm actually amazed how much I get out of movies without subtitles, like, quite honestly.
Very good.
I keep thinking, am I making this up? Because this is how I want the plot to go. But there's that moment, too, at the end where the snake goes to bite the father and Madhu throws himself in front of them. It's like, there, he's gallant. Are there any other snake movies or movies in which snake worship form an important part? Because when I went looking, this was like pretty much the only one I could think of.
In Malayalam cinema?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of too many. I'm trying to think, does Anandabhadram have any snake worship bits? I feel like that's the one movie maybe I suspect could have some snake worship elements. But then it is also... Yeah, I mean, I have to remember, but I don't... I remember Anandabhadram having a lot of like overlapping themes of like sort of out of mainstream worship traditions and stuff like that.
I wish at some point somebody would subtitle this one. It goes into my list of things I would like to see with subtitles, even if I get as much as I can out of it without. Because I actually liked the songs. They were pretty.
Yes, they were. Yes.
And, well, you know, I'm a sucker for if you're going to do a contrast between modernity and tradition. I like films that play with the clash that happens there. I love old films. So for me, this was, I enjoyed it. As you said, it's old fashioned and it's a little naive, and you have to buy into, you know, stylistically what's going on at that time, but I still found it fairly entertaining.
And the something I mean, other than the bear attack scene that I enjoyed, that was just pure enjoyment for me. I also had pure enjoyment for the dance scene with the two sisters. It was really well done and very nice to watch, because these actresses of that generation were really, they came up with classical dance. So Sukumari, that family, especially family of the Travancore sisters, and they had within their family. That was really good, and I thought it was fun to see Sukumari in a very young role. She's not playing a mother or an aunt or anything like, or a sister. She's just playing like a second heroine. It's very nice to see her when she was that young.
Yes. Yeah, for me too. I recognized her right away as well. And that's another joy for me of going back and watching these old films, is seeing people who I've seen, who are now elderly, or in her case, she passed not too long ago, if I recall, and be able to see these people when they were much younger and doing not more interesting things, but roles more appropriate to being that young. So that's also a nice choice. So, if anyone wants to take a chance on unsubtitled on YouTube, I think it's worth a watch and worth thinking about.
I would say, from my understanding of that period, this is also a little bit different than a lot of the movies you would see of that era. A lot of them they're not tackling the supernatural necessarily, or struggling with modernity. They're much more just like, they're much more on a human level type movies, is what I understand. This kind of cosmic level interplay is pretty uncommon for movies of that era. I'm just thinking of like all the Prithviraj movies I've seen, and he's very much struggling on an individual basis, like, just like in a lot of movies, he's basically like getting revenge for his father's, like for a parent or something like that. So this is very different in that context.
Yeah, it is different from what and most of my watching from that era are Prithviraj films. So it is, you're right, very different in that way. Let's move on to Ezra, which also is quite interesting in what it sets out.
It's from 2017, so it's a much slicker film in some ways, but it's not particularly great in my opinion. It's got Prithviraj playing sort of the lead character, and it has Priya Anand playing his wife, and Tovino Thomas as a police inspector. This is kind of Tovino Thomas as he's becoming the superstar he is now. So it's from 2017, like 2016 he did In the Nindamoideen, and 2017 he's worked with Prithviraj a couple of times since then. It's also got Sudev Nair, who was a Kerala State Award winner for one of the first same-sex romances in film. So Sudev Nair he's not had a lot of Malayalam movies come out, but he's a good actor, and I really that was the part of the movie that I really liked, the flashback to the past.
Me too. And it's quite funny because I was reading a couple of reviews, and they commented that the film suffers from, the curse of the second half. And I went, no, the second half is the best part.
Yes.
The second half is the much better part of this film.
It's set in Kochi, in the milieu of the last Kochi Jew dying. And so that sets off a chain of events. That and Prithviraj and Priya Anand's characters moving from Mumbai to Kerala sets off this chain of events that starts a haunting by a dibuk, which is sort of this evil spirit in Jewish lore.
Yeah, and often a spirit that has died in a way that makes it unable to move on in the afterlife, or in need of some kind of revenge. I knew about, the Jews in Cochin, and there was, what's her name, Sarah Cohen, who had been featured a lot of times. She ran an embroidery shop, and she also died very recently. But she did like all the embroidery for things that were required for, Jewish ceremonies and this and that, and was looked after by a Muslim caretaker and a Christian cook, who also started learning the business near the end of her life, because she was like, I think 98 or something when she passed away. So I'm aware sort of this community in Kerala, but we don't tend to see a lot of their stories, a lot more Christian stories in Kerala than Jewish ones. So for me, this was interesting to see this kind of mythology play out in the film.
Yeah, I mean, just population-wise, there's always been a ton more Christians in Kerala than Jews, but most of the Jews made Aliyah to Israel after the founding of the state. But if you look at the clothing. There's a lot of similarities between the Abrahamic faiths in Kerala. So everybody kind of wears like the similar kind of patterned top, and like they wear the similar type of munda underneath their top. So you'll see Jewish women cover their hair in a different way than Muslim women, but everybody kind of covers their hair to a certain extent. So there's a lot of syncretism between the Abrahamic faiths, especially around the Kochi area.
So you mentioned, sort of a series of events taking place, and we've got the death of the last Jew in Kerala fictionalized in this film.
Yeah, there are still a couple of Jews left in Kerala.
Yeah.
There's somebody who I was checking up on Instagram.
And what happens is this antiques dealer manages to get the Dybbuk box out of the house. And Prithviraj's wife, who this was the little bit that sort of ate at me, because she's upset at having to leave, family and friends in Mumbai, understandably. And sort of the way she goes to fill her time is to go shopping for antiques.
She is an interior designer.
She is.
Interior designing as a job is a very Bollywood job. So women in Malayalam cinema typically do not have that job. I've only ever seen women with that job in Bollywood movies. But yeah, she's a very different kind of wife in Malayalam movies than you typically see. She's very much like a kept woman.
Yeah. And when they're packing up their things to leave Mumbai, Ranjan, Prithviraj's character, says to her, well, now's the time to start a family. This film does enough interesting stuff for me that I actually found it intriguing to watch through a second time after having seen things, and then to go back and see how it was pieced together, because it deals with like interfaith relationships. So Prithviraj and Priya are a mixed faith couple, which is also at the heart of the story behind Abraham Ezra, who gives the film the title that we find out in the second half, that he was a Jew secretly in love with a Christian girl. And once her family finds out about the relationship, they go after him.
So in this movie especially, it is portrayed as a problem from the Jewish end rather than necessarily a problem from the Christian side. It seems, the Jewish family is much wealthier than the Christian family, but also it's very clear that their intention is they're Zionists, so their intention is to go to the state of Israel once it's been founded.
Yep.
The state is about to be founded. And so that means that there's no point in keeping ties with people here.
And Abraham Ezra ends up dead.
And his father, who practices Kabbalah, makes him into a Dybbuk to wreak havoc on the country/land that wronged his son.
And that brings us back to the present day. Here's where I do have problems with the film. Because if the idea that the Dybbuk is going to possess someone, because that's the main point, that a Dybbuk will escape the box and possess someone in order to avenge whatever happened or, soothe their grudge. But what happens in the first half of the film, when the box comes home, Priya sees an image of a girl. So this is not the Dybbuk. And things happen in the house where it makes you feel like there's a haunting rather than she's been possessed. So there are a lot of like little details that I kind of went, okay, that doesn't make any sense to me in how this particular thing is supposed to work.
I actually kind of skimmed through the Hindi version as well. It's called Dybbuk, starring Imran Hashmi. And so maybe the explanation is more clear in the Hindi version. Sorry, Nora in the Hindi version, Rosie, the girl Ezra is in love with, who also dies. She commits suicide. She is trying to stop the Dybbuk because she's trying to pull Ezra back.
Okay, that wasn't clear to me.
That wasn't clear in the Malayalam, but I think they definitely made it more clear in Hindi.
Yeah, and I didn't watch the Hindi version, and I sort of debated, should I not?
It's very strange. It happens in Mauritius and the Reunion Islands, and everybody speaks Hindi. Well, I know people from Reunion, and they speak like a pidgin French more than like some variation of Hindi and French than they do in straight up Hindi. Everybody just speaks Hindi, and it's odd that they placed it outside.
Yeah. I going back to the second half, that's where things really, because you get this backstory set in the early 40s, which was very, that was interesting, how to tie it together. And although I'm a little mixed about the ending, because what they have to do is do an exorcism to try and get the book back into its box and dispose of the box in a way that will make sure the book is not permitted to do what they need to do. A reminder about spoilers again, because I didn't realize this the first time I went through, but when you go through the second time and you realize what happens is the book transfers itself into Prithviraj's character. And when you go back through the first half, you can see moments where Marquez, who's the son of the rabbi who Prithviraj goes to see to ask questions about this, he's the one who's going to perform the exorcism. And there are little details when you watch the camera angles on him and on Priya and on Prithviraj where you understand that he understands that this transfer has happened. Mm-hmm. Because he tries to keep it a secret because he doesn't want to let the Dybbuk be aware that he's aware that the Dybbuk is now in Prithviraj. But I like the fact because to do this, as I understand it, you have to find the Dybbuk's name, which they do. You have to understand why the Dybbuk is doing what it wants to do. They find that out. And you have to perform the exorcism, and you have to have 10 Jewish people at the exorcism in order to participate in it, in order for it to be successful. And it's a little corny that they go out and find 10 Jewish tourists.
I mean, so this is apparently, watching a little bit like documentaries about like how synagogues in Kerala work now, oftentimes that's what they do. They find, because you need 10 Jewish men, I think, to perform any prayers. So that's what happens at synagogue, is that they wait for the tourists to come and ask them to come on holy days to perform. So I think that is at least like a little realistic, is that they just found some random Israelis like backpacking across Kerala and was like, please come do an exorcism.
Yeah, but as you say, I mean, on the one hand, it might seem a little like, oh, sure, convenient, let's just find the tourists. But it does show that, the filmmakers were trying to at least adhere to some kind of proper sense of how these things actually happen.
I saw Anupama Chopra's review of the book, and she compared it to Ezra a lot. And she seemed to think that Ezra was a higher quality film. I don't know about all that. The comment said she was just sucking up to Prithviraj, so which might be true. But so there's definitely like, this movie definitely exoticizes Cochin Jews in a way that feels a little icky to me. I mean, I can think of only like Gramophone had some Cochin Jews. There was a recent movie about another, like a Muslim Jewish romance also that came out. It's called Kapiriturite. So that was another romance about that had Jewish people in it. But yeah, there's only a couple of Malayalam movies that have Jewish people in it. And this definitely, I think just because of the mystical elements, definitely exoticizes it more than others. And also they gave the rabbi blue eyes, Marquez. Like, why, famously blue-eyed people, Jewish people. And there was some sketchiness about it. And the fact that there was like a rich Jew trying to take over the world, Abraham Ezra's dad. It lays a lot of like blood libel-ish issues with this movie that I think just because they're Indian and they're not necessarily aware of some of the European anti-Semitism, they might have just accidentally played into it. Like, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, the filmmakers.
Yeah, and the thing is, anytime you end up, I'm thinking of Grandmaster 2, which had a Christian religious, and ended up, like, I was cringing, at how they presented it. So I think anytime they're trying to get into some kind of supernatural or people with, mental issues, because I think that was the case in Grandmaster, you end up pulling at all of these tropes that don't necessarily accurately reflect the religion. Well, and Kabbalah too is not mainstream Judaism either.
I only know about it because Madonna supposedly practiced it for a bit.
Yeah. So they call it black magic in the film, but it is more a mystical tradition.
I think it's a bit comparable to Sufism rather than black magic.
Yeah, but at least you're getting representation from a community and an ability to go out and learn more, because I ended up doing a lot of reading to try and understand more about what was going on. I have like a very rudimentary knowledge, so for me it was an opportunity to go and learn a little bit more.
One of the things I just picked up on, it was kind of cute to learn, was what did Cochin Jews call their father? They called him Baba, which is a bit like the reverse of what Muslims call their dad, which is Wapa. And it was interesting, like that he had done some research into the culture and the local traditions, and that was definitely interesting. The song in the middle of the flashback was really haunting.
Yes.
The Hindi version did not have that song, which I think really took away from that part of that movie, but I really like that song, and it was very sweet and haunting, and there was definitely scary bits in this movie. The part with the dog was not great.
Oh, God.
For people who are really sensitive to violence against animals, there are some dark in this movie.
Because the point with the dog is they move into this house and they meet these neighbors who have a dog.
A black lab that the Priya character really befriends.
Yes, and really connects with. And then the dog, when they meet them a second time after Priya has been, or Prithviraj, I can't remember at which point.
It was Priya, as in the baby inside Priya, not necessarily even Priya itself.
Yes. Well, and that whole thing where Prithviraj goes to talk to the rabbi and he's like, oh, these are just stories, don't worry about it. And then he gets the phone call in the middle saying that Priya is pregnant, and all of a sudden that shifts everything. I was like, well, if it wasn't important before, why is it important now? Because it's convenient to the story.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure exactly when Judaism considers a person to have had a soul or something, but I think it had some role to do with the fact that maybe the fetus was like an empty vessel for the spirit to possess, because I think Jewish tradition believes the soul does not start until the baby quickens or starts moving or stuff like that. So those are things I was like tying in from my limited understanding of Judaism.
Yeah, so I mean, there are things to be careful of in the film. I'm trying to decide how I feel about the end, because they go through the exorcism, and on the one hand, part of my brain was going, okay, this is kind of neat the way they've done this, and part of my brain was going, oh, this is so corny.
When he starts violently attacking people in the middle of the exorcism?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Well, and Prithviraj shoots up in the chair, and he's hanging in the air, and
this is not a great acting movie for Prithviraj. Oh God, it's been so long since I've seen Prithviraj act in something good. It's just, he's not a flexible actor. And every movie, like when he does lovey-dovey scenes with his wife, I am uncomfortable.
Yeah, me too. I was the second watch. I was fast forwarding through a lot of that stuff. Yeah. I was like, no. And I can't
even tell you why I am uncomfortable. It's like, this man cannot be a sexual being because it makes me uncomfortable.
Everybody who watched Aya is going to disagree with you.
All the putting out of the feelings was from Ronnie's side, right? Yeah. Like, all he had to do was brood, and he's amazing at brooding. But like when he worries about his wife, or when they're canoodling right after they move into the house, I'm like, oh no.
I feel exactly the same way. And you're right. I can't pinpoint what it is that's making me uncomfortable, but I'm definitely uncomfortable.
Sometimes I feel that same way about Mammootty, but I feel like in roles where he does need to be romantic, he can somehow, some part of him can calm down and be in that intimate moment. But Prithviraj hasn't like that skill to like make his stoicness into something that can be intimate. I don't know how to describe it, but I was watching a little bit of Argiravan, and there are scenes at the end where Mammootty gets to be romantic, and I'm like, oh, this is believable. I haven't seen Mammootty in like a romance role where he isn't like half doing comedy for a while, but he is actually can be believable in romance in a way Prithviraj has not yet cracked.
The clock is ticking.
Yeah, he's almost 40.
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
But, well, he'll go back to playing cops, and that will...
Yeah, I mean that is his wheelhouse. He can't go wrong playing cops. I one of the roles I really enjoyed him in is he won a state award. Oh, Vastam. That's where he has like a sincere romance, but he's kind of a lot of the romance he's actually like trying to use the woman played by Sindhu Menon. I felt like those were some of the more convincing roles where the kind of lack of believability works in those kind of roles. So maybe he should lean into like being a user of women type.
Well, and we talked in Nandanam too about how, trying to romance ended up uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We don't want him to romance.
Yeah, we don't want him to romance, but we also like get tired of him playing cops. So what to do? What is Prithviraj's like solution as an actor? Yeah, it's not that he's a bad actor. Of course he's not. He's just not a very moldable actor.
And it is, I mean, you mentioned Tovino Thomas, and I had forgotten he was in the film. And it's a really small role, but it is sort of fascinating to see him have that really tiny role and to see now. I always find it fascinating to watch someone's career kind of just blossom like that, from lots of tiny, tiny roles to all of a sudden they're the thing,
Full respect to Prithviraj, because I think he's really supported Tovino Thomas in his journey to stardom. And I think he tried to do the same thing for Unni Mukundan at the start. It's just Unni Mukundan isn't as talented as Tovino Thomas. So even like when I've seen them do interviews with Prithviraj and Tovino Thomas, they really get along and they have a kind of similar worldview. It's just in movies, Tovino Thomas is much more of a flexible actor than Prithviraj. But they both started off really young and they're both very conventionally handsome in a very similar way. So I can see that they could have almost have been up for the same roles and stuff, but Prithviraj was definitely a generous senior actor to him.
So I don't think I have much more to talk about today.
Yeah, I don't either, but maybe I'll talk about a little bit about the Hindi version of the book. The big difference I noticed was in the 1940s bit. Imad Shah plays Ezra in the movie, Nasruddin Shah's son. And in that movie, they definitely made it a much more of a... So like in Ezra, Abraham Ezra definitely comes off as a little bit of a user. Like, he definitely takes advantage of what seems like a younger girl. He does say he is in love with her, but when his dad says no, he's like, I guess not. And he seems to be aware that she did commit suicide, but it doesn't seem like he's done anything about, maybe rectifying things with her family. So when he dies, I didn't feel super sad about him dying. I was like, that guy kind of had it. But in the Hindi version, Imad appears much younger than Sudev Nair on screen, and the girl and him seem kind of the same age. So it looks much more like a teenage romance. And when his father, like it's much more explicitly said, his father locked him up so he couldn't go see her. And when the people come after him, he has no idea why they're coming. So he seems much more of an innocent in the Hindi version. And you kind of understand his anger a lot more, as the spirit. There's a lot of things in the Hindi version that are much more explicitly detailed. The story is a little bit more defined, and that makes sense, right? Because the same director is having a second chance at telling the story. So if there are some things that you don't understand in Ezra, it's explained in the Hindi version a lot better.
Okay, now I wish I had watched it before we started recording. I will have to go in and, although now I'm thinking, do I really want to go through this story again? Maybe I'll give it some time.
Yeah, I mean, you can do what I did, which is skip through the bits where you had that's not quite clear. Let me go through the Hindi version. And I think the rabbi is not as hokey in the Hindi version. He just seems like a more normal dude.
Well, and in the Malayalam version, Prithviraj's job is important because... Yes. He works at a nuclear waste treatment company.
Yes.
And the idea is that the Dibuk ends up in him because they're going to do something with the nuclear waste and wreak havoc on everybody. Again, I didn't get why you had to have revenge on people who weren't even connected to the event, but I'm not a spirit, so what do I know?
Again, those are the things where I thought the idea of the blood libel kind of comes in, because he's not just wreaking havoc on people, he's wreaking havoc on a whole land. The Jew is not of this people. He is of a different people. And those are things where I was like, this is anti-Semitic. and so go in with your eyes open about what this movie can imply.
Yeah.
Because the Jew as the outsider definitely comes into play here. I mean, definitely the rabbi character is on the side of good, etc. He's not, at the end they humanize him a little bit because he said he's going to come visit the new baby. But yeah, it's not great. It's not a good look.
So, if we want to sum up a little bit, we've got 2 films today that explore 2 different kinds of faith traditions, mythologies, in very different ways, sometimes problematic ways.
There is some aspect of making a supernatural movie that exoticizes people from whom those traditions come and makes them a little bit like a curiosity rather than, maybe one of us. And we've kind of dealt with some of the complicated ways that when you're doing snake worship, which kind of come from tribal and maybe more localized Dalit or Dravidian traditions rather than Aryan traditions of India, you end up. There's definitely in that movie they definitely took a side, which is the environmental people, or the people who worship the snakes were the good people, but they definitely made them not the mains. They kind of made them a curiosity, and the same way Ezra, which definitely is a lot more problematic in my opinion, because this is in some ways a tradition that is much of more of a minority in India. So you can't even say that we're just making a movie about traditions in my family. We worship snakes. When you engage with a very small minority group and one that's been famously persecuted, that requires a little bit of thought before you engage with their supernatural traditions and, make them the villain in the movie.
Thanks for listening to the Polandine Patti podcast.
If you like what you're hearing, remember to come back for our next episode and share our podcast with your friends.
If you'd like to connect with us, you can email us at polandinepatti@gmail.com or reach out to us on our Twitter feed @polandinepatti. See you next time.